South Africa has officially been removed from the Financial Action Task Force Grey List. It's a list that flags countries with deficiencies in combating money laundering and terrorist financing. And so the delisting, it marks a major reputational boost for the country. But of course, there are some questions that still remain. So, I mean, what did it take to get there, and how will this then translate into real economic governance gains at large? We're going to be unpacking this and more for investors, institutions, just the rule of law, and whether South Africa can, in fact, keep its financial system clean in the long run. Annaline, Debt Rescue COO, is going to be joining us to weigh in further. Annaline, on that note, good morning and thank you for your time.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So, Annaline, we obviously saw the story unfolding since the announcement, and for context's sake, it's perhaps important to understand what this delisting actually means, right, in terms of the greater scheme of things. And if we're looking at resolving systemic corruption, or whether this is just a technical compliance tick box exercise, there's various views and vantage points. Help us understand what the immediate economic significance is for South Africa.
Well, I think the important thing to understand is what this had meant for us historically, and why are we so grateful that this has now finally been lifted. So we are now meeting the global standards that combat money laundering and terrorist financing as set by the FATF. So the delisting restores the country's reputation. We now considered a trustworthy financial system, and therefore it means that global investors can now look at South African institutions now that the enforcement has been improved. So in short, it marks the end of 2 years of financial scrutiny and reopens the doors for easier trade, investment and capital flows, which will strengthen the confidence in the economy overall.
Okay, so Annaline, thank you for setting that, painting that picture for us. It's important to also understand during that grey listing period which sectors were most affected, right? And which now also in the same breath will benefit as a result of this delisting once again. Also, just the reforms at large that are going to be needed. There's legal, there's institutional reforms that would have helped get us off that list.
Absolutely, yeah. So the hardest hit sectors were banking, trade, finance, cross-border payments, transactions that faced extra scrutiny and cost. So importers and exporters, remittance operators were especially affected. And the delisting is obviously going to see these sectors being the ones that will recover first and fastest. So we should see transactions start moving faster, become cheaper and improve liquidity. So definitely, advantages coming in from that side. With regards to the transformation, obviously what we have seen is the fact that there's a lot of legislation that has changed. Yeah. We were forced into obviously reviewing these legislative changes. And it's been really, really important to see that, we're going to be monitored very closely. We're going to be checked. But, the Government Laws Amendment Act of 22, there are 6 major laws that came into effect there, and they affected, for example, FICA, they affected the Companies Act, and beneficial ownership registries for companies. So there's a lot that had to be done. But the good thing is it was done, and it's now going to be monitored very, very closely going forward.
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to ascertain whether it's premature to celebrate, because you obviously have to look at how we're going to maintain this, right, and how it improves our competitiveness, particularly ahead of G20 and, what is needed for our country's growth at large. But I wonder if we could also look at progress that's been made when it comes to prosecutions of financial irregularities, financial crimes linked to state capture as well, because there are still weak parts, right, that still remain. And I wonder where we need to be strengthening ourselves at this point.
Well, there has been progress, but it's not been, I think, as fast or as severe as we'd obviously hoped it would be. The NPA has advanced several high-profile cases and recovered billions in assets, but many of the Zondo Commission matters are still pending, and the weakest areas remains enforcement. So particularly amongst non-financial businesses, there are a lot of areas where there might still be compliance gaps. So it's really important that we now start seeing the results of, yes, we have the enforcement mechanisms in place, but now seeing it through and taking it through to the next step of actually the accountability and the necessary penalties where applicable.
Yeah, because it also looks at how small businesses are ready, non-profits. So they're ready for this new compliance landscape. Are the rules a bit too burdensome when it comes to the red tape at this juncture? How are they affected?
Look, I think they are strict. They definitely are strict. But I think what we have seen over the past 15 years, give or take, that it's necessary, unfortunately. And I think if it's a question of what to expect, it is pretty clear of what the expectations are. It shouldn't be too hard to comply. They're transparent in terms of what the requirements are, in terms of making sure that you are compliant. So I don't think it'll be too much of a burden, as long as the operational side on the side of business or government that has to do the administration have all the necessary processes in place and are able to process it quickly, then there shouldn't be any problems.
So, Annaline, given what we're seeing before the courts, given what's happening politically, given where we are as a country ahead of local government elections and just the state of affairs as well, at this point, how would corruption scandals, how would political patronage, how would weak enforcement at this point undo any progress that we've made as we speak?
Well, if accountability slips, the delisting won't be permanent. So it's really important that we continue to demonstrate that these results, these efforts that have been made, that they are going to yield, ultimately results that corruption cannot happen again, that scandals don't go unpunished, and that enforcement remains strong, that all these laws that we've made are actually seen through, that they're enforced, and that ultimately that there is accountability, because otherwise investor trust could ultimately erode again. So the next review is in 26, 27, and it's going to look at the effectiveness, all these things that we've put into place, that they are now being actioned, that they are getting results, and that they are preventing any of these areas that led to us becoming grey-listed ultimately.
Yeah, it obviously had impact on citizens and consumers alike. So beyond the banking industry, trading, cross-border that you alluded to earlier on, perhaps you can talk to how it needs to become more consumer and citizen-centric. How do ordinary citizens then benefit from our country being off that grey list? Is this perhaps more elite-driven, given the circumstances as well?
Not necessarily, no. I think this is more, we've got to look at the impact that this had on the economy as a whole. What did this mean for the country when we were grey-listed? So during this time, obviously, we saw a multitude of businesses being affected with the fact of, trade and banking costs that became more expensive or more difficult. So this hampered growth, economic growth. And economic growth ultimately boils back down to the fact that we're not creating jobs at the rate that we should. Quite the contrary, we're actually losing them, and we're sitting with massively high unemployment rates. So by making sure that these measures are in place, it's going to help the ordinary South African, because what we're going to see is economic growth ultimately, and that is going to lead to an increase in job creation. So us as ordinary South Africans were affected very much so, even albeit indirectly. It definitely had an effect on the economy there for us.
So, from your vantage point, if you have the benefit of hindsight now, do you think it was a blessing in disguise, given the pace at which, change had to occur, even the role of the private sector in helping to maintain transparent and ethical systems at large? How would you weigh in there?
Look, it obviously took a lot longer than what was anticipated. And originally we were told it was going to take a couple of months. It ended up taking 2 years. So it was a much longer process than we'd expected. And we do think that the fallout was significant because of that. But it was a wake-up call. It exposed some of our weaknesses, and it pushed for these reforms. So otherwise it could have taken even longer, and this could have continued for even longer, these matters that were of such grave concern. So it improved cooperation across institutions and regulators, and the experience was tough. The end result is a stronger, more transparent financial system, and hopefully it is now much better equipped to detect and prevent abuse and fraud.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to also see what we can do to maintain this and remain off that grey list. But Annaline, thank you for your time and for weighing in, just making sense of really what this actually means going forward for us. South Africa's removal from the FATF grey list, it does signal a step forward, but it's not the end of the road, because we know that true form is actually going to be tested, not only with compliance and checklists, but credibility and accountability at large. I want to thank you for your time and for weighing in. Let's see how we translate this progress into lasting trust and tangible growth. Annaline van der Poel is the Debt Rescue COO, weighing in there.